Years ago, before all of the AI mania, I spent 2 years on the go as a digital nomad. I sold everything I owned, condensed my life into one backpack, and lived in 24 countries in about 24 months. Lisbon, Bali, Chiang Mai, Medellin, Cape Town, and on and on and on. I took something like 5,000 photos. I uploaded every photo into Lightroom, Adobe's photo software, the version you used to be able to buy, like software, with a one-time payment before it became a subscription you rent forever. And I tagged them, I rated them, I said this photo is 5 stars, 4 star, 3 star, sorted them by country. This took hours and hours and hours of my time. Then Adobe shifted to a monthly subscription, and I wasn't traveling, so I no longer took enough photos to justify that cost. So I walked. That was 6 years ago. 30 of those photos hang on the walls of my house. I printed them the last time I opened up Lightroom. The rest of them are still in there. They're still in Lightroom. I haven't looked at them since. I can't. I don't want to pay for them. They're trapped. The honest part is I haven't even really tried. The project is daunting. Whatever I exported wouldn't have that same Lightroom categorization. So I'd leave it.
And I don't think the average user is even aware what they might be missing. Like when it's inconceivable to take a week, who has a week, to move my photos.
That's Lisa Dusseault. We'll come back to her in a bit. But what she just said about photos applies to almost everything you've ever uploaded anywhere. And this is the small version of a much bigger story. Why is it so hard to get 5,000 photos out of an old subscription? Why is it so easy to switch banks, to walk your money across the street to a competitor? No friction, no fee, but it's so absurdly hard to do the same thing with almost every other piece of your digital life. Your photos, your health records, your playlist, your ride history, the fitness data on your wrist, biometric data, and yes, the years of conversations you've had with an AI chatbot. This is what we're exploring on this episode of The People's AI, presented by the Vana Foundation. I'm your host, Jeff Wilser, a longtime journalist and the host of the AI Summit at Consensus. This is season 4, 8 episodes, and we will be going deep into data portability, what it is, why we don't really have it, and what's actually being done about it. Today is the foundation. We're going to walk through why this matters, why we're sort of stuck, and what's been tried. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty, user ownership, and data portability. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share the value it creates. And yes, can move their data from one platform to the other. Learn more at vana.org. So let's get into it. Let's start with the basics. What is data portability exactly, and why? It sounds like such an abstract, weedy, wonky, even kind of boring concept. Like, honestly, we need better branding and label for this, but it is the word that we have. It's the word everyone's using, so we'll stick with it. But why should anyone outside a regulator's office even care? Like, what's the point? Well, Peter Swire has spent his career on this question. He's a law professor at Georgia Tech. He runs the Cross-Border Data Forum, and he served 3 tours in the White House under both Clinton and Obama as one of the country's go-to people on digital privacy. He's basically written the textbook on U.S. privacy law. Here's the cleanest definition of data portability I've heard.
So data portability, when lawyers talk about it, says you can get your stuff out of the platform. So for instance, if you were on Facebook and you wanted to download all your Facebook stuff, Facebook has to have it so you can say a give it back to me button. They have to take that data, be able for you to download it, and it should be in a format where you could upload it to some other place if you wanted to. That's the basic part of portability. Portability is, hey, I'm a user, I want to get my stuff out of your platform so I'm not stuck there with it.
So that's the legal definition. Most of us have felt the thing, though, without ever calling it that. Lisa Dusseault has been watching users bump up against this for years. She's a CTO of the Data Transfer Initiative, basically the nonprofit trying to clean up this mess.
I don't know if users necessarily diagnose the problem. They become frustrated with a service and then sort of semi-consciously realize that, but it would be a real pain to move. And so they put it off and they stay annoyed without diagnosing that one of the reasons it's so hard to move is because of a lack of data portability. And this is most powerfully seen with services that have a lot of data, like my email. Services that have complicated and rich data, like photos and videos, all in photo albums that are organized, that I have a history of likes and views and metadata. That's very complicated data. Playlists, the songs I've played and enjoyed over 20 years online, and how many times I've played them and which version, that turns out to be very complicated data too. Services that are more visually, more device oriented, more visually oriented, I find people don't even necessarily think about data portability from something like Netflix, for example, because they experienced it on their TV. But there's a case to be made for porting my Netflix somewhere else so that it can understand my preferences and what I've already seen, and not offer me over and over again to see a movie I've watched every Christmas every year for 10 years.
So that's the small annoyance, the friction, like I felt with my Lightroom photos. You feel stuck, you stay stuck, you move on with your day. But there are real costs here, economic, structural, measurable, and someone has actually put a number on them. Canada has been doing good work here.
Our main goal of this report was to try to put a value on data portability for consumers. And that was partly because we felt like there wasn't a very good understanding about data portability in Canada, not a concept well understood by kind of the everyday consumer.
That someone is Brad Callaghan. He's an Associate Deputy Commissioner at the Competition Bureau of Canada, which is essentially the Canadian analog to the US Federal Trade Commission. They decided to actually quantify what data lock-in costs ordinary people. The report is called Your Data, Your Control. As an aside, pretty great theme for this, Your Data, Your Control.
Canada was also kind of a bit of a laggard in terms of putting in place policies that would encourage data portability and encourage more competition. So we kind of wanted to get to the bottom of that and understand why, and to put some numbers around the value of data portability. And I think that the findings were quite important. The key thing is we know now customers can really save significant amount of time and money by having a data portability option. And we also know about the kinds of things that are going to kind of push towards more acceptance of data portability, and the things that are going to hold consumers back. Privacy, for example, stuck out as a big concern for people. We also know that one of the main motivators of taking up data portability as a consumer is the savings, the monetary savings.
Do you have any insight into how those savings manifest? Is there a dollar number you can put to it?
So we found, in the whole, we found that customers can save between 1.1 billion and 3.8 billion in annual costs. This is for the insurance market as a whole. So when you take that down to the individual customer level, we're talking about 130 Canadian dollars in terms of their annual savings on their insurance, and about $180 in terms of the time that they would save. The takeaways are really important. I think the big thing is there is a lot of potential here for more competition in Canada and more savings for consumers. I think what's holding back is understanding about what it is, and making sure consumers understand that they're in control. It's why we call the report Your Data, Your Control. And that's not to undersell the importance of privacy concerns, which we know a lot of people have. That was borne out in the data. But I think the big thing is we know that the more information that we can communicate to build awareness about what data portability is, that you control when you're going to share the data, the more people are going to be able to kind of reap the benefits of lower prices and saving time.
So that's the dollars and cents version. But Brad's bigger point is structural. There's a reason apps you've used for a long time seem to be getting not better, but worse. And this is not subjective.
Yeah, really, it goes to the heart of the competitive process, I think, which is about switching. So anytime a customer is looking to move from one provider or product to another, you have to effect that switch. In some cases, that can be quite easy. But in other circumstances, it can be quite sticky, or you encounter a lot of friction. And data portability really kind of gets at that aspect. In the digital economy, obviously, we're creating a whole lot of data as we use our products, our phones, the platforms, the applications that are on it. And it can create a lot of stickiness for when you want to go ahead and move to another platform, for example. I think examples that might come quickly to people is if you have been on one social media platform, you've developed a profile, you've got your whole kind of ecosystem of friends, contacts, the messages that you have been posting, interests that you like. And when you decide you may want to move to something else, or maybe to multi-home, use two competing platforms at the same time, you may have to think a lot about how easily you can get that data over into your other product. So these things we think about in the competition context as frictions to switching, barriers to switching. And from the company perspective, obviously it can be quite a big advantage. It can be a competitive advantage to have users locked into your product. And for us, data portability is something that we see a lot of potential in to increase competition. The more customers are in the driver's seat to seamlessly take their data over to another provider, the more competition can work from them. Because what we see is that if companies are kind of relying solely on this lock-in effect, they can get lazy. And that means that customers don't really benefit from all of the good things that competition brings. Lower prices. In the digital context, oftentimes it's in terms of decreasing the service. So, example, maybe you've been on a platform for quite a long time. Now, all of a sudden, you're seeing more unprompted ads. And the only way you can get rid of those is to pay for a premium service, for example. So there's kind of a mix of kind of price impacts on competition and just service impacts that really speak to the importance of being able to port your data over to another provider of your choice.
So Brad called it lazy, but there's actually a more colorful word for the same idea. And the writer Cory Doctorow has been hammering on it for years. It's a technical term he calls in-shitification. The mechanic in his telling goes like this. Companies are good to their users. Users get hooked. Then the company starts squeezing, degrading the service, pumping in ads, raising prices because the users can't easily leave. Platform decay is not a bug, it's a strategy. And it works because one specific check has been removed, the threat that you will walk. Portability is that check. When data portability disappears, in-shitification is what fills the space. The American Dialect Society actually named its word of the year. It's a useful word. So how did we get here? Why is our data so often, why does it feel like it's trapped and stuck on certain platforms?
In the 90s, in the late 80s even, I was on bulletin board systems. And it was amazing to me as a nerd teenager that with hardly any, fellow nerds in my own high school, that I could get on a bulletin board system and find people who were interested in the same nerdy things as me. Like I was literally the only kid in my high school that I knew played Dungeons and Dragons, but I found people who played Dungeons and Dragons on a BBS. I was like, this is going to be big someday, to be able to connect with people over our computers and our phone lines. I've been moving forward interoperability ever since in different ways in different companies.
Lisa Dusseault has been watching this from inside the industry since the late 80s. As she says, she's a teenage BBS nerd, And she's a theory about how we got here. The big question is, so if portability is so obviously good for users, why don't we have it? The answer, as she sees it, is not really a conspiracy. It's a series of choices that made sense at the time and added up to a mess.
I think there's a big element of historical determinism here. How did we get here? And two of the big factors I'd like to look at in the last 20 years are Web 2.0 and the companies quietly building AI before we all knew it was going to be big. Web 2.0 was kind of amazing for mashups, and it also kind of killed interoperability standards because everybody could now put up their own web API and not bother with the slow, painful, expensive, annoying process of participating in a standard and agreeing on a standard. And so rather than so for example, during this era, I was at a startup for a while that was doing scheduling and places. And so to schedule a thing at a place, you needed to have a directory of places, restaurants, meeting rooms, ballparks, just places in the world that people could be going to in the evening or meeting at. And so Foursquare, Yelp, Yahoo, all had their own APIs. No standards, no attempt, no thought of building interoperability for those things. Because Web 2.0 made it so easy for them to each have their own API. That creates a certain kind of lock in itself. Like a third party that builds something for Yelp is now unlikely to move or include Foursquare. Or if they do, it's more expensive for the third party to implement each of these APIs as we did. But I don't feel so sorry for developers that are able to do it. It's the users who can't, who aren't able to write to these APIs that I feel are the real victims of that.
So quick technical aside for the non-devs here, but I promise it matters. When Lisa says API, of course she means an application programming interface, the rules a company publishes for how outside software can talk to its data. Each company can write its own. Now, the alternative to APIs is what's basically an open standard, when a whole industry agrees in advance on the same rules, same labels, same formats, same definitions. Any product can talk to any other. So that sounds great. When everyone uses the same standard, your data moves easily. When every company has its own API, your data moves on their terms, their format, their timeline, their permission, or it doesn't move at all. So why didn't the industry just build open standards? Because it turns out that getting everyone to agree even on what a street address means is harder than it sounds.
An interoperable standard involves agreeing not just on the message formats, but also on the meaning of things. And it turns out there's a lot more difficulty agreeing on the meaning of things than people usually expect. Once somebody writes a schema saying, we're going to put the title in a field called title, and we'll put the description in a field called description, and we'll put a street address in a field called street address. They feel like the tough work's done, but there's so much complexity hiding under street address. And is that the street address of the front door or the back door or the annex or the restaurant and its entertaining room, two addresses are one, two titles are one. How much can you fit in the description? If I put 2,000 characters in the description, is that going to break your implementation? There's so much complexity in deciding not just the syntax of these things, but also the meaning of them and what is permissible and what everybody needs to be able to handle. That's why it takes a couple years for people are doing their day job during the day to come to meetings or dial into meetings and agree on what these mean.
So building open standards is slow, tedious, painful. Years of meetings about whether address means the front door or the freaking back door, while the rest of the internet was sprinting past you. That does not sound like fun. So APIs let any single company write its own rules and ship next Tuesday. That's convenient for the company, less convenient, it turns out, for you, the user.
A web API, the company just says, well, we know what it means to us. Yelp had their own database. Foursquare had their own database. They made decisions. They could make them internally, and they expressed those decisions in their own web API that they don't have to coordinate with anybody else, done and dusted in 2 months.
Just to be like really simple with this, when someone uses an API, it's like, okay, I am me, Jeff, a solo person or solo company. I am going to, the API is going to tell me this is the anatomy of the data structure for that one platform.
Yeah.
And it gives me kind of like here's the 17 boxes they want me to fill out. I fill out their 17 boxes, as opposed, so it's kind of a unique custom thing for platform, as opposed to whatever industry that is saying, we agree upon these are the 20 boxes that we're all going to have with uniform standards. And that makes it very easy to like have the Lego pieces snap together no matter what platform you are. Am I getting that right?
That's absolutely right. I call these unilateral APIs because they are in control of one company. That one company can make them or iterate them however it likes, which makes them fast and convenient for that one company, but they are unilateral.
It's hard to infer motivations, but would you say that is the API-driven model, was that primarily because of just ease and convenience and we can quickly do this? Or, okay, to rephrase, it's not necessarily there was some dark, sinister plan to trap people for the next decade. It's like, all right, this is doing some kind of macro standard would take years potentially. And we want to ship next Tuesday. So we're going to use the API. And that's kind of, and doing that and having many companies doing this at scale is kind of what got us into this mess in the first place structurally.
That's right.
What Lisa is describing is what the entire industry agreed to do. And almost nobody noticed at the time. And then things sort of took a turn for the worse. Ironically, a respect and concern for privacy was inadvertently part of the problem.
It got worse because building on the convenience and the we'll just do what's easy and in front of us attitude of Web 2.0, we had a combination of privacy concerns and AI and collection of data for AI training. So privacy concerns really were the Cambridge Analytica scandal was emblematic of that. That even making APIs that allow the user to consent allowed so much data to be sucked up by another company that large platforms realized they had big liability in making their APIs too easy to access. And not just legal liability, but reputational liability. In fact, probably the reputational liability is even more important because they could always write licenses to protect their legal liability. But the reputational liability came at a time when companies, I think, if I'm right on the timing, I think companies like Google training AIs in the early days realized that they needed masses of data and that the masses of data that they had, I mean, even if this wasn't a competitive advantage for training AIs, it was a competitive advantage for serving advertisements. Mm-hmm. And so locking down APIs progressively over the last 10 years, a lot of companies have locked down APIs and made them harder and harder to access and done review of companies requesting to access APIs and making sure and putting rate limits on, not just for the users or the service's scaling benefit, but to make sure that the, API user is not scraping data for AI training or for advertisement targeting.
And by locked down APIs, you mean that historically someone's able to just kind of connect to a platform?
Terrific question. The APIs often used to be available if you got an API token that just said that you could only use so many resources with this token, so that to be fair to everybody else. But then large companies especially started applying review processes before you could even get an API token to find out if your privacy policy was okay, what your business model was, what you intended to do with the data. And this is a lot more gates to put in front of people trying to use an API. Some APIs, the company wanting to use them has to get SOC 2 reports, which can cost thousands of dollars to get auditors to go through in order to get access to an API. Those are large barriers.
So if I hear you right, it's almost like it's complicated because what is in some way an effort to protect privacy ended up putting up barriers for those very same customers to eventually get their data, right? This API, like the APIs got more restrictive. The net result of that was data being more siloed and trapped on platforms.
Yeah.
So privacy and portability, values that should have been allies, got pitted against each other. Cambridge Analytica gave the platforms the cover. The AI race gave them the motive. The walls went up, and most of us cheered because the walls looked like they were protecting us. They were also protecting the data, locking it down, gating it, charging admission to it, slowly, quietly over years. This is what enshittification looks like when it isn't loud. Not a sudden price hike, not a bait and switch, a slow squeeze. By the time you wonder where your data went, it's been sitting on the other side of a wall for a decade. So Lisa walked us through the historical accidents. Pinar Ozkan, who studies digital platforms at Oxford, gives us the cold strategic logic. The reason it's hard to leave isn't a bug, it's the business model.
Well, obviously, AI cannot happen without data. Algorithms train on data. And so therefore, we need to look at data as, almost like if you're making bread, that will be your flour. There's nothing without it. And when you look across the board, across industries, data has been extremely important, especially now because there are so many digital platforms in our world. Data is their bread and butter, right? And that is why they will try to create a stickiness to their platform by making sure that data is as not portable as possible. And that makes sense because the more they get your eyeballs, the longer you spend time on them, the more data they collect on you. And that means that they understand you even better, and they understand whether from day to day your preferences are changing or whether they can push a certain product on you. And so data portability is bad news for digital platforms. And that helps us understand why it needs to be pushed by regulation, because strategy-wise, it wouldn't make sense for them to make data portable.
That's the consumer side. But lock-in shapes the economy too, sometimes at a scale that's hard to imagine until somebody attaches a number to it. Peter Swire once served as expert witness in a case where the number was $1 billion.
So I was the expert witness in a bunch of lawsuits where it was auto dealer software. You go to the local Chevy dealer, they have software that runs their shop. And the two biggest players for helping the auto dealers, the two biggest players made a deal that they would only use each other's apps. And that if all these other apps would now be prohibited and treated as malware if the companies wanted to use everybody else's apps. So that means you were locked into one of the two big players with monopoly pricing. And it means that all the software people who had cool apps to help with the dealers were frozen out and basically pushed towards getting out of business. Okay. And so fast forward after a bunch of years of litigation, the big two companies paid over $1 billion because they were found to have violated the antitrust laws. They locked people into this software. They locked out the competitors that would have had better software. And eventually they had to pay a lot of money. That kind of lock-in can happen for cloud companies, right? So let's say you're using AWS today and you want to switch to Azure or Google or some cool other cloud provider that you like. There's a worry that you're like way deep into your current cloud company and you're not going to be able to get out of it easily. And so this is a business version of getting locked in and not having portability.
So that's how we got stuck. Web 2.0 made it easy. Privacy concerns and the AI race made it stickier. The platforms learned that holding your data was good business, and they got better and better at it. Now, what about getting unstuck? Now, the truth is, the rest of the world has tried more than the US has. Europe in particular has been writing a playbook in 3 steps. Step 1 was GDPR, Europe's 2018 privacy law, which included the right to data portability. The US has mostly copied that one. California first, then about half the states. Step 2 is the Digital Markets Act, which went in force in 2024. It says portability has to be real time. You shouldn't have to keep re-asking for your data. The US has not copied that. Step 3, also from the DMA, goes further. The biggest platforms, the gatekeepers, have to make their products not just portable, but interoperable with competitors. Different word, bigger idea. Here's Peter walking through all 3.
So step 1 was data portability. That's been in place for more than 10 years. Now the US has copied it pretty much.
Was that from GDPR?
Exactly. So it was in there. It was proposed and taken seriously for a while before that, but it was really locked in for enforcement purposes in 2018. But they've had 8 years to do it, so that's a while. Basically, the US copied data portability law from Europe. The words are basically the same. Then step 2 in Europe is they said, here's a better version of portability that they've been putting into their recent laws. The better version is, I want to get real-time updates for my stuff. So if I put in a request going forward, then they're supposed to give me real-time updates, and I don't have to make a new request all the time. So that's law in Europe. That's not the law in the United States. The United States, if you do it on April 1st and you want next week's stuff, you got to do April 8th. And that's more of a hassle, but the companies have learned how to do it in Europe. Okay. And then the third thing in Europe through this Digital Markets Act is for the big players, the gatekeepers. They're saying, don't just do data portability, do interoperability. We want consumer devices and consumer software platforms to be able to move things back and forth in a way that makes users able to do it. And the AirDrop example is the example that's easiest for people to understand sometimes.
AirDrop is the example. Apple, arguably the most walled of walled gardens, was forced to make its files cross to Android. That's not portability, that's a higher order thing, which raises an obvious question. Has any of this regulation actually worked? Has portability, the original step 1 version, produced something real for users anywhere, not just on paper? Well, yes, at least once. Banking.
I wouldn't say that there was a moment at which the game changed. It's been quite slow and it's an evolution.
To explain what made open banking different, here's Pinar Ozkan again. She's advised the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, the Bank of England, the European Commission, and the OECD. She has been tracking open banking from the start.
And that makes sense because especially in industries where data is sensitive, and I would say finance, healthcare, education, data is sensitive and there's lots of data. And in those industries, it makes sense for this shift to be slow because customers are wary of where their data is going and what people are doing with this data. And in the context of the UK, there was also an interesting timing issue in that we had the arrival of GDPR at the same time as the arrival of open banking. And in people's minds, these actually really conflicted because GDPR meant that hundreds of companies were emailing us saying, we have your info, can we keep it or do we have to delete it? Almost begging you to keep your data. And then open banking says, hey, you can now share your data. So the two actually created some sort of a psychological conflict for people. But the answer to the question of whether more data is being shared now compared to before, absolutely. And the reason for that is that open banking and open finance give you much safer ways to share data through APIs. And before that, the mostly available way to share data was through screen scraping. And that's actually, that means that I'm giving a third party my login details, which can really be unsafe. So yes, if you are aware, then the new regimes are much safer in terms of data share.
So that's the policy design that works. And here's what it actually unlocked. Brad has a small, beautiful example.
I think one of the really interesting things that we have seen in the open banking context is that it's not just opportunities for new kind of smaller innovative banks to come in and compete in the same markets. It's the innovation that can kind of come from these adjacent markets. So for example, because a customer is now able to kind of share their financial information when they want, you get budgeting apps that don't need to screen scrape anymore, a more unsafe approach to it. And all these things kind of that aren't competing directly as a bank, but bring an entirely new service and open up entirely new markets.
So the laws helped, but laws don't move data. Plumbing does, infrastructure does. And one of the people building the actual plumbing is Lisa Dusseault, the CTO of a data transfer initiative. Lisa told me about a small company she talked to that morning. Privacy focused, helping parents manage their kids' data. Now, to do their job, the startup has to apply separately to Google, to Meta, to TikTok, to Amazon. Different process for each, different requirements, different timelines. The startup may never get off the ground. Lisa wants to do something about that.
So part of the problem of companies holding on to data and blocking third parties from getting access has been the trust steps they all make them go through. And so a small company, I just talked to one this morning, very privacy oriented, helping parents deal with their children's personal data. Have to apply to Google to get Google data. They have to apply to Meta to get Facebook and Instagram data. They have to apply to TikTok. They have to apply to Amazon. They have to apply to each of these, and every process is different. The requirements are different. The outcome is uncertain. And how can this startup really help parents if they can't reliably get access to these data services? And so this is such a problem and such a barrier that we have built a neutral, for the public benefit, nonprofit trust registry to replace all of those unilateral processes.
Oh, it's really smart. So instead of having to, so a small business, they fill out one instead of like 17 different applications for the different big tech companies. Almost like how college admissions are kind of changing their forms to have students have one application that can be used across dozens of universities.
Yeah.
And then there's one more category of data portability that we haven't really discussed much yet, and it's a whopper: AI memory. A couple of months ago, after the whole kerfluffle with the Department of War, Anthropic, and OpenAI, a ton of users tried to switch models, and they discovered something painful. The memory doesn't really follow you unless you kind of awkwardly try and drag it with you. So you have years of conversations, instructions, and context that makes the model feel like yours. All of it stays. The plumbing for moving it is just starting to be built. And that is a sprawling topic that we'll be covering in depth in the very next episode on the season. So as we wind down, I asked Lisa, given all of this, I asked her whether anything really had changed, right? What's the temperature of this? Whether the recent AI exodus might finally make people care? What's the state of play? And she gave the most honest answer anyone really gave me on this whole topic.
I've watched a couple catalysts come and go, though. When a whole bunch of people were leaving Twitter, suddenly their ability to export their old messages and import and save them somewhere else, or to move their social graph, became super important. But the interest in that died down after a few months. And then when Reddit changed its licensing and a whole bunch of forums and users on Reddit were outraged and wanted to leave Reddit, data portability from Reddit became a huge deal for a couple months, and then it died down.
Why do you think it is? Why did it die down? Did people lose interest, or did Reddit put the walls up?
Yes. Probably it was addressed a little bit, and it's very hard for users to maintain the pressure when small things are done to address it. Probably. I didn't even think about that until something you just said triggered that. But honestly, I just think it's the world we live in today. Yeah. There's so much to manage and so many things going on and so many outrageous things.
Yes. When I don't need to mention some of the headlines that can outrage folks across the board. And so the data portability doesn't usually make the top 5 of or top 50 of things people are upset about in the world right now.
It's been exciting when it becomes the topic of news, and then it's just not usually the most outrageous thing out there, or not for long. So it quickly drops.
So it quickly drops. And that's where we started this episode. Quickly dropping. Lightroom. 5,000 photos from 24 countries. 6 years sitting in a program I no longer pay for, 30 photos on walls of my house, and the rest effectively gone to me. Now, I tell myself I'll get to it, I'll figure it out. There probably is some clever workaround. I'm sure there are Reddit threads of people who have figured this out. I'm sure it's figure outable. I'll tell myself I'll do it, but I won't. We both know I won't. That's the small, tiny version of what Lisa just described. And it's a thing that no one's really that upset about. It's something that's not making the top 5 of the outrageous things in the world, right? It is also in shitification. The slow version, you buy a tool, the tool gets good, the tool gets sticky, but then the terms change. By the time you notice, the door is closed behind you and your stuff is inside. Well, that's just one room of one house. This season of The People's AI is a tour of the rest. More episodes on health records, identity, AI memory, the data wearables that you're collecting, what happens to your digital life after you die. Each one a different lock on a different door with the same problem behind it. We'll be sending a season exploring all of this. That is going to do it for this episode of The People's AI, presented by the Vana Foundation. Thank you to our guests, to Peter Swire of Georgia Tech, who's been working on this question longer than most of us has had the question, to Lisa Dusseault, who's not just diagnosing the problem, but actually building the plumbing to fix it, to Brad Callaghan and his team at Canada's Competition Bureau for doing the work of attaching real numbers to a problem most regulators have left as an abstraction, and to Pinar Ozkan at Oxford for translating the strategic logic of platforms in a way that makes the rest of it make sense. Thank you again to my partner, the Vana Foundation. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty, user ownership, and yes, data portability. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share the value it creates. Learn more at vana.org. Thank you to Kate Morgan for research. Thank you to Jasper Chua, our producer, for sound design, music editing, and the videos you'll see on YouTube. Thank you to Bradford Craig for our theme music. And thank you, dear listener. If this is your first time at The People's AI, please subscribe, share it on social, send to a friend. Next week, AI memory. Thanks again. See you then. I am Jeff Wilser. Thanks for listening.